What an eventful week. And actually, I think the election has something to that relates to what we're learning today, right? This is about how we get along with each for many of these sources, and that happens to relate to the election as well. How do people with different points of view, different opinions, get along with each other, and when do we have to stand up on principle, and when should we uh, favor more peaceful, less confrontational solutions? And that's what we've been looking at for the past few weeks, right? It is not so clear that our religious priorities, that is, our requirements, our religious requirements, always have to be primary. There are times when we have seen leniency on the part of the rabbis. They there are circumstances that we've reviewed together where the rabbis say, "Listen, don't make a fight out of customs that aren't that crucial, because there's a value called peace." And they'll use the language we saw in Hebrew of mipnei eva, which means one should uh, one should fear doing something that will create controversy. Eva, people not getting along with each other. Enmity. So we looked at sources last week that went a step further from the original Mishnahs that we learned about Demai. Remember, Demai is produce, and we're not sure if the produce has been properly tithed or not. So it is produce of questionable status. That is Demai. And there's an entire tractate we learned about the Mishnah that deals with how a community might get along with each other when Demai is what is served all the time in a lot of people's homes, right? Not because they're making a point of serving non um, tithed food, but because the rabbis sort of divide the world into people who are very strict on these sorts of issues. They're called chaverim, and those who are less strict because maybe maybe they're more lenient, or maybe these laws are just so complicated that they're not really sure how they work in practice. And so we're not sure if they tithed correctly, and we don't want to mistakenly eat food that has not been tithed, right? That's, you're liable for the punishment of excommunication if you eat food that should have gone to the Kohen. And so uh, the rabbis create ways and circumstances whether they feel allow for getting along with each other. And we looked at some of those circumstances 2 weeks ago, and then continued last week, um, exploring the related question of a person moving from a community where they practice things in a certain way to another community where they practice things in a different way. If you remember, the topic was, do you work on Erev Pesach or do you not? And it came to, well, if people see you not working on Pesach and everybody else is working, maybe they're going to say, this guy thinks he's better than us. And that will create enmity. But there are others who said, no, they're just going to say he's lazy, and it's not going to create enmity. In the same way that I think it does create enmity when you are the only store open in the market and justifying your being open because you came from a different city. That is a situation um, where certainly one must be careful of creating unnecessary controversy. The last source we learned was from the Mishnah Brura, which is the 19th century's code of Jewish law, right? And uh, the Mishnah Berurah is a very, very important source. But what we talked about was he's operating in a different set of circumstances. He's already writing after there are schisms within Judaism, in a time where there are Jews who aren't just practicing things differently because they have a different custom, but are practicing things differently because they have a different ideology. And perhaps that is what leads the Mishnah Berurah to be very careful about allowing compromises on people's religious observance. He is afraid that telling people, well, you can change what you do if you move to a new city, or you can change what you do if you're in an oppressing circumstance. He's afraid that being too permissive in a situation like that is going to water down the religion to the lowest common denominator. And I think for him, there's much more of a sense that enmity or controversy is just going to be a part of life now. And that value may have existed before where there was some semblance of a unified community. But we don't work today as a unified community. Today, we understand that there are ideological differences, so we shouldn't change our behavior to bridge those ideological differences. They're always going to be there. So you just eat what you eat, and you eat what you eat, and find other things perhaps that you can get along with. But the value of compromising on religious priorities is just not as important for the Mishnah Berurah. So for him, he says, listen, if it's a very, very insignificant custom, okay, fine. But even on a rabbinic level prohibition, that means something that's not clearly prohibited in the Torah, but the rabbis, you should act this way or you shouldn't act this way. Even on a case like that, you do not compromise for other people. One holds the rabbi's ability to legislate in high esteem. That's where we left off last week. Today, we're going to go a step further into the world of kashrut. Now, I sort of hinted a little bit in past sources. What would it look like if you took the principles of damai? Remember, damai is produce. We're not sure whether it's been tithed or not. So what would it look like if you translated that scenario into a more contemporary setting? And I said, well, the contemporary equivalent might be kashrut. But on the other hand, kashrut is from a whole different section of Jewish law, right? It's a whole other area, and nobody has yet, at least the sources we've reviewed, nobody has used the principles of Tractate Damai, the tractate of perhaps untithed produce, and said, well, let's now extrapolate from this into a modern scenario where people are keeping different levels of kashrut in different homes. Well, it turns out by the time we get to the Middle Ages, there are sources that do extrapolate. So you see, there is a method to my madness. I'm teaching you some sources that maybe you're saying, why the heck is Rabbi Grover teaching us about untithed produce? Nothing could be more completely irrelevant to our lives. Well, guess what? You need to learn those laws in order to understand how they get adapted over time to changing circumstances, and they are used to justify different decisions that are made much, much later on related and unrelated topics. So there is a method to my methodology here. And now we're going to get into more concrete examples. I've got to leave a bit early today at quarter to 11. So I'm not sure how much of this we'll get through, but let's do the best we can. And I'll try and leave some time always at the end for a discussion on these sources. So we're going to start today with the responsum of the Maharil. The Maharil, who was a German authority, 14th, 15th century. And you can find him in your notes. And I'm also going to share my screen so you can see the Maharil, at least in English, right there. Linda, are you able to read, Linda Friedman, are you able to read for us
Okay.
this source? Thank you, Linda. Okay, so you'll see this is the Maharil quoting some of the sources of Damai uh, and relating them to contemporary issues of kashrut. Linda, I'm gonna ask for your patience even before you begin because I will be interrupting you frequently.
No problem. Regarding the question of eating Gentile butter when visiting a place where they have no practice to be strict.
Okay, stop right there. Eating Gentile butter, what is that? Well, some of you might know that one of the great controversies in modern kashrut observance, is whether the milk must be milked uh, under Jewish supervision or by a Jew, right? That's called, if you go to the grocery store, Chalav Yisrael, Jewish milk, right? If you go to Sobeys, you will see they have a separate section for Chalav Yisrael milk and a separate section for regular kosher milk. Now, what is this about? I mean, I thought it's either kosher or not kosher. Well, there are some who say that it must be uh, milked by the milk must be milked by a Jew. Why? Because, well, the theory is not so crazy. The theory is um, milk looks the same. I'm not a dairy expert, but I've seen sheep's milk before. It looks the same as cow's milk, which looks the same, I think, as most milk that can come from other animals. And the fear is because it looks the same. Do you really trust a non Jew to deliver milk that he or she says is, can everyone hear me okay? It says yeah, you can hear me okay? All right. Because it looks the same, you wouldn't know for sure that you're drinking milk from a kosher animal unless you had a trusted person supervising the dairy from the moment it was milked to the moment it was put in the cardboard box or our famous Canadian plastic bags. That's the that is the logic behind it. And if you think about it, it is not so crazy. Now, famously, Rav Moshe Feinstein, when he came to America, he was his son actually just died over the weekend, Rav David Feinstein. But his father was Rav Moshe Feinstein, widely regarded as the greatest American rabbinic interpreter. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Widely regarded as the uh, most important American Jewish legal interpreter of the 20th century, right? He issues a very famous leniency. Imagine that, a leniency, very, very rare nowadays. His leniency was, we have supervision in America of the dairy process. It's called the FDA, or whatever the Canadian equivalent is. I think the Canadian Food and Drug Administration, right? So we know that you can't switch the milk because it's being federally regulated. They're not going to put camel milk into the dairy milk. You don't have to worry about it because there's a supervisory process that's even better than one that we could enforce. Maybe, people have a lot of opinions about this. Maybe he was saying, listen, if I start imposing on the Jewish community that they have to drink Jewish milk, it's going to make kashrut even more difficult, already in a difficult circumstance. And that's why there are many people today who say if Rav Moshe was alive today, he would never have passed that ruling. Because today, Chalav Yisrael milk is widely available. And there are many friends of mine who keep kashrut to the level of Chalav Yisrael. They require that a Jewish person was there to supervise the dairy from the moment it is milked. Butter, of course, comes from from milk, and so Rabbi Yaakov is saying, it is possible that uh, there are communities in my time where you might be eating Chalav Yisrael milk, and another might not be eating or drinking Chalav Yisrael milk. So he's answering the question, what about I'm visiting a place? My custom is, let me share the screen again. My custom is I don't eat chemat akum, Gentile butter, but I'm visiting another city, and the city I'm visiting in, there is no stringency in this city to keep this prohibition for one reason or another. By the way, I think also a part of the leniency with regard to Gentile butter is, yeah, you might be able to mix camel's milk and cow's milk, and you wouldn't know the difference. I don't know if anybody here is a dairy expert, but I think you can't do that with butter. Like, it's impossible to make camel milk into butter if you mix it. You would know the difference between camel milk butter and um, dairy milk butter. Although I am prepared to be called out on that. I have absolutely no clue how they make camel milk butter. I've never seen such a thing. But of course, the fear is you're going to a non-Jewish person, they're going to use the cheapest ingredients possible. So different communities had different practices in this regard, and the Maharil is answering, what do you do when you go from one place to another? To a Jewish place, you're going to a Jewish address, right? Your Jewish host, but you know that in the city where he lives, they serve chemat akum, butter, and we're not sure, uh, or I won't say we're not sure, but butter that does not require Jewish supervision from the start. Linda.
I am inclined to permit eating it as part of a larger mixture with those who permit it, because there is no reason to be stricter here than in the case of a mixture containing demai, which is permitted in Bavli.
In Bavli Chulin. Okay, very good. So this is what, thank you, Linda. So one of the things that we didn't learn about Demai is that the Mishnah is stricter with regards to Demai when it's the whole food item. In other words, remember we were talking about the tomatoes? If I give you a tomato and the tomato is Demai, you're not sure if it's been tithed or not, you can be strict with regards to the tomato. But if I give you a salad and tomato is one ingredient in the entire salad, which has many, many different ingredients, and the only thing you're not sure of are the tomatoes, then in the Talmud it says you can eat the salad, because the tomato is not, it's a part of the course, but it's not the whole thing. And since Damai is it's not something we're strict about, because remember, there's always a chance maybe it was tithed properly. Well, for the risk of a risk, we're not going to ruin the whole meal. If it's the entire thing is that tomato, we can be strict. But if the tomato is one ingredient out of many, there's room for leniency. So he says here, look, butter, I'm inclined to permit it. Why? Because nobody takes a stick of butter and eats it for breakfast. Butter is always added to something else. It's never the core ingredient. So why should we be strict here with regard to butter? And look what he's doing. And this is fantastic. He's learning from Damai. So you see, this is what I'm saying is the transition that happens in the Middle Ages. We learn from Damai, which is really a source that is not applicable to the Middle Ages, because Demai is only regards food from the land of Israel. But they find a way to make it applicable. The Maharil finds a way to make it applicable. He says, look, that's a case where there's a doubt of a doubt of a doubt, and it's not the main ingredient, so the rabbis permitted it to be eaten. Well, that's sort of like this kashrut issue of butter, chemat akum, not Gentile butter. It's a doubt of a doubt of a doubt if any non-kosher thing went into that butter. So let's also be permissible and allow people to have the butter, because it's not the main part of a meal. Keep going, Linda.
But to eat, excuse me, but to eat it when clearly visible seems forbidden, even at a Suda mitzvah where there are a lot of people. Even though
Sorry, Linda, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
There we go. Now I can. Whoops. Let's try that. Can you try speaking now, Linda?
Okay. But to eat it, eat it when clearly visible seems forbidden, even at a Suda mitzvah where there are a lot of people.
Right. So now he says when it's clearly visible, he's a little bit stricter here. So sometimes I'm taking butter and I'm putting it on the bread. Now that I can see the butter. So he says, look, don't eat it that way. But if you know that your fettuccine was cooked with a little bit of butter to help make the sauce, you can't even see the butter, that's okay. But even at a Sudat mitzvah, remember, where does he get that from? Even at a Sudat mitzvah. Do you remember last week when we talked about the ofra for the wedding, right? Remember, there was a leniency that the rabbis found because it was a big party. It was a celebration for a wedding. And they said, you're going to ruin this happy, joyful event, this wedding, with your little kashrut stuff, with your little damai problem. So just be quiet and don't ruin the wedding. Eat the food. Well, he says, look, even at a wedding, don't eat the butter if you can see the butter. It's interesting, eh? Like you want to say to him, well, what difference does it make? I thought kashrut is about what I eat, not about what I see. But sometimes, in Judaism, what you see is important. This is the famous case of a person who asks his rabbi, am I permitted to go to McDonald's? I'm really thirsty. Or am I permitted to go to McDonald's to use the bathroom with a kippah on my head? You've heard of this case before? And the rabbi suggests that there is still a danger going into McDonald's with a kippah on your head. Why? Because someone might assume that you're going in there to have a Whopper, a Big Mac, right? So what we see is important. If I see the butter and I know that this doesn't follow my custom, that could potentially have an impact on the way I carry out my own observance of kashrut, because I say to myself, look, I'm not strict on this, so I don't have to be strict on anything anymore. It's out, as they say, out of sight, out of mind. Okay, Linda, keep going.
Even though I found written in the name of Rabbeinu Simcha that one who does not normally eat Gentile bread may do so when eating with one who does for fear of enmity.
So listen to what he's saying now. Again, I'm sorry, Linda. I know I keep interrupting you. But this is a really important source. Every sentence is meaningful. First of all, he says, butter, my ruling is, what happens when you go to a city and they eat butter that you don't eat? The rule is out of sight, out of mind. If you can't see it, then it is okay. And he bases that on the reading in tractate in Masechet Chulin. But then he quotes Rabbeinu Simcha. Rabbeinu Simcha is Simcha of Speyer. He's one of the Tosafos, meaning a couple of centuries before the Maharil. And Rabbeinu Simcha said something very interesting, even more lenient. What is it that Rabbeinu Simcha said? One who does not normally eat Gentile bread. Now, this is not butter. Note, this is bread. Pat akum. Pat akum. What is my fear with regard to Gentile bread? It's very similar to the fear with the milk, right? I'm not sure of ingredients that went into bread. And actually, we know even today in some places it's customary to use meat products in the production of bread. You can use lard to make bread very tasty. And so because we're not sure about where the bread came from, there are different practices about pat akum. Am I allowed to eat bread baked by a non-Jew or not? And Rabbeinu Simcha says, if there is fear of enmity, if it's going to create conflict, you can eat the bread. And what does Rabbeinu Simcha base his leniency on? His proof comes from Yerushalmi Damai. Let's back up, back up, back up. Look, he's quoting a source that we already learned. Very good. This is why I'm telling you we have to learn all the sources because it teaches us everything we need to know. Here's the Yerushalmi Damai. Rabbi Yanai ben Rabbi Yishmael in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. They permitted eating Damai on the Shabbat before the wedding for fear of enmity. This is the wedding case. And we are afraid that you're going to ruin the wedding if you start making a stink about whether the food meets your standards or not. So Rabbeinu Simcha said, just like we were worried about that with regards to Damai a few centuries ago when there was a thing called Damai that we were worried about, today we can learn the same thing with regards to Gentile bread. And when there is a fear that our stringency will create enmity between the guests at the wedding, we just eat the bread and be quiet. But, Linda, what does he say
It
here?
seems to me that this case is different.
So Rabbeinu Simcha, listen, the Maharil could say, and based on this, I'm going to be even more lenient with the butter. Remember, he's being stricter with the butter. He's saying if you can see the butter, you can't eat it. Well, why I can see the bread? Why is Rabbeinu Simcha allowing me to eat the bread, but the Maharil's not allowing me to eat the butter? Does everyone understand what the issue is? So the Maharil says, no. They're not the same case. What is the difference between Gentile butter and Gentile bread? Linda?
In that case, everything the Am Haaretz eats is demai. If all are eating demai and he does not, there will be enmity.
In the case of the bread, right? The bread which is based on the wedding, remember, with demai being served. We need to understand that that is a case where the entire meal is of questionable status. The entire meal. And so if you sit there at a wedding, imagine, at 1 course, 2 course, 3 course, the waiter comes over for you, and the entire time you're sitting like this. You're not touching the food. Well, somebody at the table, listen, there's a few Jewish mothers around at every wedding who go, why aren't you eating anything? That is the situation, according to the Maharil, that is the situation at the wedding. That it is a person who is afraid that all of the food is damai, and if he doesn't eat something, he's going to create controversy because he'll be sitting there with a look on his face the entire time, and everybody's going to be upset because they're going to say, What are you ruining the wedding for? You're not eating something, it's like you're protesting the wedding. That will create enmity. Okay. Now, why? What? But he says this case is different. Go ahead, Linda.
And so with regard to Gentile bread, for bread is the essence of the meal, and one should not deviate from common practice in order to avoid disputes, even if it means being lenient with the rabbinic stricture.
Okay. So why is this case similar? Because bread is the essence of the meal. I know it's not like that for us today. For us, we think of the chicken breast as the essence of the meal. But back in the Middle Ages, the bread that is the meal. Actually, in Jewish law, that's what makes a Suda. What makes a Suda is the presence of bread. That's when I wash my hands and say the bracha. That's a big deal when there's bread served at a meal. And the Maharil says, if you don't eat the bread, people will notice. It's like you're not participating in the wedding. Bread is not butter. Bread is the essence. If you're not eating it, someone's going to notice, and that will create enmity. And he says very clearly, one should not deviate from common practice in order to avoid disputes. He uses the word there, common practice, but then he says something even more interesting. Even if it means being lenient with a rabbinic stricture. Now, a rabbinic stricture is not the same as custom or common practice. Common practice or custom is a very low level of observance. But a rabbinic stricture, that's an actual rule. Now, remember what the Mishnah Brura said up here. Better he should suffer fights and not violate a rabbinic commandment, for one who violates a rabbinic command is liable for death at the hands of heaven. The Mishnah Brura in the 19th century doesn't give permission to be lenient with a rabbinic prohibition, but Rabbeinu Simcha, according to the Maharil, does allow such leniencies with regard to rabbinic level prohibitions. Fascinating, this leniency here, and how it disappears as we get to more modern sources. In order to avoid disputes with a rabbinic stricture, one can be lenient. But now the Maharil gets back to butter. And by the way, you'll know what he says. If you've been paying attention, you'll know what he's going to say now. Linda, go ahead.
With regard to butter, many people sometimes don't feel like eating butter.
Right.
And there is no potential for enmity.
See, what does this remind you of, Linda? Do you remember the source that we learned about the guy in the market? Remember what it said about the guy in the market. He's not working on a day when everybody else is working. Enmity. And so there's a debate about whether that really is going to create enmity or not, because people are going to say, look, it's just Moishi, the lazy storekeeper. He wanted the day off. It's not that he's making a point that he's right and we're wrong. He just wanted the day off. Doesn't it remind you of this?
Yeah, because you might not want butter, and so it's inconsequential. But when you're talking about breaking bread, you're talking about not eating your meal.
Exactly. No, come on. I'll say Moshe's on a diet. He's not having any butter. That's different than not eating the main course. No one is going to get upset if you eat bread without butter, or whatever it is that you're eating without butter. So it's actually a very practical, very down-to-earth kind of method of navigation that the Maharil is suggesting. You need to think to yourself, is what I'm doing likely going to be interpreted as a me objecting to the food or the nature of the celebration. If that's likely to happen, be quiet and eat the food. But if people aren't likely to say that, if nobody will notice that you are eating something or aren't eating something, because many other people eat butter or don't eat butter for various different reasons, then obviously you should maintain whatever restriction you are used to maintaining. Very practical, and I hope you all agree it makes sense. Last sentence.
This is all the more true when most communities are strict and the lenient individual is an insignificant aberration.
That's right. So this last line is very important. When everybody is being strict and the lenient person is rare, then it's not going to create a controversy. I mean, you can think carefully about this. I'd like you all to. If most people are strict and you're lenient, you're not going to get upset when somebody says, I hope it's okay that I don't eat, but I love you. You're my friend. I'm celebrating the wedding with you, but I hope it's okay. I'm not going to put butter. It's just not my practice. Because that wouldn't create enmity, right? I know that most of the people in my community are strict with regards to the butter. I am the aberration. I'm the one who's lenient. Well, if I'm the minority who's lenient, then there should be no enmity when I hear that somebody who's eating at my house or sharing my simcha with me uh, is strict, because I expect it. I know that I am the minority and they are the majority. Interesting, eh? That's something else that we have to consider with regard to sort of prejudging a situation and thinking for ourselves, is me eating the food likely going to create enmity or not? And something to think about is, if I say something like, I hope it's okay that I don't eat the food, is the person going to say to me, who do you think you are, you Moses? Or is the person going to say, I totally get that, I have friends too that will not eat the butter, and we're still friends, right? Those are two different reaction, and it's based on what the practice is in a particular community. Thank you very much, Linda. Thank you for helping us with the reading. Helen, would you like to read this next source? You're next on the screen, but I see that your screen is off. I'm not sure if you're there. Adele, can I pick on you? Could you unmute? Thank you.
Okay?
Yes, so now we're going to the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is the code of Jewish law. So the codes try and take these discussions, right, and um, clarify that they shouldn't be discussions. Let's make a law. Let's understand what the rule is. So that's the job of the Shulchan Aruch, and let's read Adele about what the Shulchan Aruch says with regard to different dietary practices among different Jews.
Okay. One is careful not to eat Gentile bread, may eat from the same dish as one who is not careful about this.
Okay, stop there. Sorry, Adele, I'm also going to be rudely interrupting you every sentence. One who is careful not to eat Gentile bread may eat from the same dish as one who is not careful about this. I go to your house and I know that at your house you don't keep the same strictures about bread that I keep. I won't eat Gentile bread. So when I make, what's a good dish with crumbled bread on top? A schnitzel, right? When Carmela makes schnitzel, she uses, like I'm sure most people do, sometimes people use corn, but she uses bread crumbs to make the schnitzel. Will I eat chicken schnitzel at your house when I know that you don't keep the same rules with regard to bread as I do? And the Shulchan Aruch says, yes, you can eat from the same dish. Now, notice, he doesn't say you can eat the schnitzel. He says you can eat on their plates. What is that about, the whole idea with plates? Well, remember, in Judaism, not just the food has to be kosher, but food imparts flavor to the utensils, the fork, the knife, the pot. So if I go over to your house and you say to me, I know that you are coming over for lunch. I just want to let you know I eat Gentile bread at my house, so I won't serve that for you. I'm not going to make schnitzel for you. I went to Sobeys special and bought you breadcrumbs that are made from Jewish bread. Will you now eat the schnitzel? I bought the ingredients special for you. So what does he say, Adele? He says, yes, you can eat as long as the ingredients are ingredients that are okay to me. I can eat even though you made it in the same pot as the schnitzel you made yesterday.
Even though the flavor of Gentile bread will get mixed in with the flavor of Jewish bread, one need not worry about this.
Right, exactly. You don't have to worry about it. Now, he doesn't say why you don't have to worry about it, but what would you think, Adele? Why is he saying you don't have to worry about it? The only thing I can think of is he says, listen, the chance that someone put in some non-kosher ingredient into the bread, the chance that it is small to begin with. And on top of that, the chance that that flavor imparted itself into the skillet so low also. And then that flavor went back into the schnitzel that I made for you the next day is like a remote possibility of a remote possibility of a remote possibility. That's the only thing I can surmise about why he makes this leniency. So he says, listen, don't worry about it. I know if you want to worry about it, you can worry about it, but the chances are so small that don't turn this into a situation where Jews cannot get along with each other who are earnestly trying, right? He knows this is a situation where the host is going to the trouble of changing the ingredients of the schnitzel to make me comfortable. And I'm going to say no, because I'll find one little area where there might be a problem. So the Sephardim, remember the first source in the Mishnah Berurah is Rabbi Joseph Karo representing the Sephardic approach. And now we're going to read the Ashkenazic addendum to the Sephardic approach. But let's just see first that the Sephardim are lenient in that regard. Okay, Adele, keep going.
Note, some say that when one who is careful not to eat Gentile bread eats with others who are not careful about this, he may eat with them on account of concern for enmity and fighting.
So is this more lenient or less lenient? This is much more lenient. Read the next sentence, Adele, and there will be your proof.
Since if he does not share their bread, this is the essence of the meal. Therefore, they permitted it on account of enmity. but one should not extrapolate from this case to other prohibitions.
Very good. So now, Adele, do you see that it's more lenient? Rabbi Caro in the first half of this source says you can eat from the same dish, but he doesn't say you can eat the schnitzel in a home where they don't keep pot Yisrael. But the Ashkenazim say, following the point of view of the Maharil, right? I'm pointing, you can't see me, but I'm pointing to the Maharil. Following the point of view of the Maharil, the Ashkenazim say, actually, not only can you eat from the same pot, you can even eat their schnitzel. You can even eat the schnitzel from Gentile bread. Why? Because if you create a fight over this, if you say, I'm not going to eat your bread, there is concern for enmity and fighting, right? Mishum eva in the Hebrew. We are worried about people not being able to get along with each other. Now, if he didn't say this last thing at the end, well, what might I think, Adele? If he didn't say one should not extrapolate from this case, what might I think? I might say, well, perfect. I have a friend who doesn't keep this and that, and who eats milk and meat, and who eats pork. Like, I'll keep going on the list. And perfect. I don't have to worry about any of it. I can eat their food because we want to prevent situations of enmity among the Jewish people. Well, don't go there, says the Ramah. The Ramah is the author of the Ashkenazic commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. Don't go there. I'm only talking about schnitzel. I'm only talking about Jewish bread and non-Jewish bread. Do not extrapolate from here to other situations. This is, okay, let's just do one more source, because I really want to know what you all think about that last line. One should not extrapolate from this case to other prohibitions. Thank you, Adele, for reading. Who can I go after next? I think Razy, I haven't heard you read in a while, and I'd love it if you could read for me this source from the Shach. The Shach is a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, and he comments on that last line, one should not extrapolate to other prohibitions. Go ahead, Racy.
All right, but one should not extrapolate from this case to other prohibitions, even to Gentile butter and other similar low-level prohibitions, because only with bread is there a possibility for enmity, because man lives by bread, by not.
Remember the famous source in the Torah, right? Lo al halechem levado yeh ha'adam. Not by bread alone shall man live. We read this in the Haftorah before. Excuse me, not in the Haftorah. Oh, my mind is drawing a blank now. But some of you know, man lives by bread. The expression al halechem yichyeh ha'adam. On bread, man lives. Go ahead, Razy.
Not by other kinds of food.
Sorry, but not by other kinds of food. That should be a but.
Oh, but
Excuse me.
But not by other kinds of food, because there are many people who don't like to eat butter.
Right. That you see, there are many people who don't like to eat butter. You see where he gets who don't like to eat butter. You see where he gets this from, right? That is from the Maharil. The Shach gets that from the Maharil, and his uh, justification for the leniency with regards to bread is bread is special. Come on, everybody. It says that man lives by bread. It doesn't say that about chicken. It doesn't say that about squash. It doesn't say that about cucumbers. Bread is the essence. So we're going to be lenient with bread, but we should not apply that leniency on bread to all other foods. Thank you very much, Razy. And what I'm going to do now is, can everyone hear me okay? Sorry, I should unmute if I'm going to ask you all a question. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. The internet is a little slow today on my side.
Start thinking about people at the strangest times, something crops up.
So there is something about, it's interesting. We have this expression in English, breaking bread with somebody, right? It's almost like the Shach is saying, we have to be able at least to break bread with each other. Maybe we can't have dinner. Maybe we can't have the same schnitzel, but we should at least be able to have something, because the sharing of bread invites, encourages, sustains community in a way that's really important.